Welcome to the High Return Real Estate Show, the podcast for heavy hitters. 2 men, 1 mission. It's time to build your empire. Welcome to the High Return Real Estate Show. This is Shecky, and I'm here with my partner, Jack. How you doing, Jack?
Hey, everybody. Great to be here with you today.
Awesome. We've got a great show for you today. We're going to really talk a lot about how the rental market is changing. And this is mostly due to millennials. And some of what we're going to discuss is the kind of lifestyle they have and how it relates to renting, what cities they're moving to. And if you own rental property or are considering buying some, you're going to want to listen very carefully to this entire episode because it's going to give you some really great insights into being a successful investor in the rental market. So, Jack, tell us a little bit about who the millennials are.
Yeah, Shecky, this is a fascinating subject as far as real estate investing goes because this is the first group, in a long time, this first demographic that's actually rejecting buying a home.
Yeah.
And on a large scale, space. So we're talking about the largest demographic group now in the U.S. They've actually, due to the mortality of the baby boomers, the millennials are now the largest group. And so what they do is going to impact our economy, and they're going to create, it's almost like I think of it like a basketball moving through a garden hose as they move through different layers of their lives and stages of their lives. They're going to disrupt, they're going to change, they're going to have a huge impact on how things play out in our economy. So right now, and there's different research that shows different ages, but predominantly we try to look at, okay, what do most of the experts agree on? And most of them put them between ages 20 and 36 as of this recording in 2017.
Yeah.
They're nearly 76 million strong. And due to immigration of this age group, the number is continuing to increase. So, Shecky, this is going to be huge for all the real estate investors to understand where are the trends heading over the next decade compared to renting versus buying a home.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, Jack, because much of how this is being driven is by the difference in lifestyle between what a millennial is and what a Gen X or even what a baby boomer is. It's just very, very different. So, for example, they're living with their parents longer. Probably has something to do with it's more difficult to get jobs now, even with college degrees and things like that. And it's just expensive to move out, right? But once they do move out, they do not want to live out in the burbs, okay? They typically want to move towards the center part of the city. Now, obviously, in most major cities, the closer you get to downtown, the more expensive it's going to be. So from a standpoint of a real estate investor, if you are hovering in that area that's 10 to 15 minutes from downtown, think about this, somewhere where it's an easy bus ride, an easy bike ride, or an easy Uber ride to the center of town, you're in a really, really sweet spot as far as location from a standpoint of your investment, right? So obviously with living with their parents longer and moving to the city, they are also redefining some of the common institutions like marriage. So, I'm a baby boomer, and in my generation, if you weren't married by the time you're 25, there's something wrong with you, and now it's like they're just waiting much longer to get married.
So yeah, I'm right on the edge of the the millennials. And I can't believe you actually asked me if I was a baby boomer, dude. I'm 39. So
I didn't ask that. I asked how you identify.
I act more mature than my age, I guess.
Let's go with that one.
I'll go with that, right? But so I have a lot of friends that are in this millennial category, and it's so interesting how so many of them are just in no rush whatsoever to get married and have kids.
Yeah. Well, it's just a redefinition of that institution. And there's no question, I think that has something to do with transients. So again, when you get into this position where job security is not what it was like when I was growing up, right, when I was that age, and again, I am a baby boomer, it's just much more difficult now, and people are hopping jobs a lot more often. That creates a lot more transients.
Well,
so they might, go ahead.
Yeah, just another thing to consider too is that the millennials are coming out saddled with extreme levels of debt, of college debt.
Yeah.
There's a lot of experts like, one of my favorite, Robert Kiyosaki of the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book. He says that this is the next major bubble, is the millennials being strapped with so much college debt that's also preventing them from being able to buy a home.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
They're forced into the rental market.
Yeah, and it's not the same kind of debt as like debt that's leveraging an income property. That's a whole different kind of debt, and that's a whole different podcast.
Right.
But the cool thing about these Gen Xers is they're not afraid to pick up and move to a new city for a new career, for a new opportunity, whatever, right? And that presents some interesting things. So the question really is, how does this relate to real estate, Jack?
Well, yeah, I think we're starting to, uncover this, but there's a lot more layers to this, because of inflation and the cost of living. They're making less. Well, they're actually probably making the same or more money, but they have less spending power than their parents or their grandparents. And then on top of that, with the strictness that's over the last decade that's unfolded due to the 2008 housing crash, it's a lot more strict terms for them to be able to get loans to buy houses.
For sure.
So they often either cannot afford to buy a house, or they haven't built up the credit to buy a house. And especially in the areas where you just described, where they really want to live, it's almost off the charts in terms of them being able to actually make it happen financially. So they're much more likely to rent. And another thing that's really a trend that's happened, tech is such a huge, part of our growing economy, our growing sector within our economy. I mean, I guess we could argue whether our economy is growing or not. I think a lot of people would say it's barely creeping along, but they really want to live in cities that have a good-sized tech community, and that's where, things really get interesting, Shecky, is what's going on with, the tech job sector, and where are those jobs starting to transition to?
Yeah, obviously, and as many of you know, I spent a lot of years in Austin and was there experiencing the explosive growth that happened in that city and continues to happen. And it's a great city, not to take anything away from it. But I was like the frog in the boiling water. And, you spend, actually for me, it was less than a decade in a place, and that turned into a completely different city in 8 or 9 years. And it's just complete gridlock. Like you can't get around. And prices have essentially doubled and tripled in some places in a very, very short period of time. So from an appreciation play, certainly it's great. From an affordability standpoint, it's absolutely impossible. And, you look at some of the obvious places like San Jose, Silicon Valley, New York, Boston, LA, Chicago, and Austin. These are all sort of the deep-seated tech cities in our country. These are ones that have long been known for big tech hubs in our country. However, if you look down that list, what's interesting is they're also happen to coincide with some of the most expensive places to live in our country.
Right.
So what's interesting is that what's not so obvious what's going on right now is there's this really cool trend, and some of our listeners probably already know about this already, for tech companies to base their operations in key cities in the Midwest. I mean, you look at, cities like, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Indianapolis, where I am, it's there. These are places that have really great technical infrastructures, but the cost of living is significantly less. And they're good enough sized cities where you can attract, millennials that still want to go and do cool things and fun things and have a good bar and restaurant scene and food scene and fitness scene and all that kind of stuff, right? Like they don't want to be in a small town. So it's really an interesting perfect storm, right? So these places, like that I had mentioned, and other places, even Detroit to an extent, and even Kansas City to an extent, are becoming major players in the tech industry. So we as real estate investors have to really keep an eye on this trend, and it's very exciting to see what's happening because it just creates a broader and more stable rental base for us when we own properties in those kinds of towns.
So Shecky, I got a question for you. So you're a perfect example of somebody that was in an explosive tech city in Austin.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it just booming, and real estate was just it's going off the charts there. And then you moved to Indianapolis, to set up our operations. What was the difference did you see in rent between the two? I mean, you're renting, and so you have a firsthand perspective of the difference between the two cities. I mean, what do you see? How much difference is there?
Wow.
You're downtown Indianapolis.
Yeah. I mean, so, like from a personal standpoint, obviously I miss my friends and I miss some of the warmer weather of being down south, right? And Austin's a great city, but I don't miss the cost of living there. And comparatively, I live like a king in Indianapolis. I got an apartment downtown, right downtown Indy, we're in a really, really great location. I'm in a beautiful historic building that was converted into residences. I have a beautiful view of the city. I have a gorgeous 2-bedroom, high ceilings. For me to have the kind of place that I had like this in Austin, instead of my rent starting, it's a 4-digit number, okay, but it starts with a 1. If I were to have this same kind of place in downtown Austin with the same amenities and the same view, that number would start with a 4.
Wow.
Okay? Just to put things in perspective. And obviously in New York, it might start with a 6, right? But it's, or more, depending on, neighborhoods change block to block. But I'm in really the best part of downtown Indy. And there's a lot of little pockets, but I'm in a really great pocket. So yeah, it's just been night and day. And then obviously from a standpoint of an investor, you and I both know this. It's like being like a kid in a candy store when you look at some of the costs of what you can buy stuff for in cities like this, especially when you come from other places that are so expensive. And we see a lot of our investors that come here, their mind is blown with how far their dollar can go. And it's really, really attractive.
So no wonder these companies are relocating their tech, operations to these cities that are more affordable for their millennial worker base.
Yeah, because they can pay them a good working salary, and that employee can then have a decent life, and they're not spending every last bit just to make the rent. And again, for us as investors, that's even better. I mean, do we want a renter that's stretching every penny just to make our rent payment, or do we want somebody that can make the rent payment comfortably? I mean, again, these are nuances of real estate investing, but when you start looking at the big picture, they're pretty important.
Absolutely. So let's take a look at these markets. In the Midwest, you got Kansas City. We talked about Indianapolis, Detroit, Cincinnati, Cleveland. These are all great considerations, and these are good rental cash flow producing markets where they have good price to rent ratios. But the smart, savvy investor, like all of our listeners, are going to dial it in a little more. You're going to look at things like state taxes, cost of insurance, legalities of eviction, stability, the areas and the crime rates. Are there any, are there war zones? Yeah. And of course, the main one, and really the only thing, I shouldn't say only, but it really is the only thing I care about when you boil it all down, is what is the ROI? What kind of return on investment am I getting? That is what I'm most concerned about. So when we talk about state taxes, look at Indianapolis or Indiana as a whole, it's capped at 2% for, investors. contrast that to my hometown here in St. Joe, Michigan, you can get taxes as high as 5%. And then your cost of insurance, apparently there's not a lot of, major claims in Indianapolis. Or Indiana, I should say, not a hurricane belt. It's not a flood belt. It's not a big natural disaster belt. So
yeah,
that can keep the overall, cost of insuring your property way down. And then legalities of eviction. Our property management team is actually, I don't know if they were joking. I think they were actually serious, so that you could have a lease on a napkin signed by the tenant on a napkin and take that into the judge, and it would hold up in the court of law. So contrast that to, other states like New York, where it takes 6 months or more to get your tenant, out of your property if they stop paying. We have a lot of great qualities here. Stability, crime rate. There's no war zones. Of course, that creates a lot of more stability in your market. And all that is going to affect your ROI, and especially your price to rent ratio. That's the main thing that I look at, is what's the price to rent ratio, and then all these other things really add up. And then, that's what, Shecky and I have been so attracted to this particular part of the country. So Shecky, take it away, man.
Yeah, no, you can bring up some really great points, and really all those things like the taxes and insurance, and how fast you can evict somebody if they're not paying, that sort of stuff. Those are the nuances that are going to separate the seasoned investor from someone who is just only looking at ROI. And I agree with you, ROI is the most important number. I totally agree. But for example, it could easily be said, like Chicago is only 3 hours drive from here. It could easily be said that Illinois is the Midwest, right? It's the next state over, right? However, if you started looking at, even if you got outside of Chicago where it's very expensive, and you got into, some of the other middle-sized cities in Illinois, Springfield, whatever, and you start looking at similar price properties and rents and things like that, even if you got close, you'd get creamed on the other stuff. You'd get creamed on the taxes. You'd get creamed on the insurance. You'd get creamed on eviction procedures, things like that. So these are just some of the things that we want to bring to light for our investors. So anyway, that's, I feel like, a really, really good overview for everybody to really understand, just in review. Think about millennials. Think about the kinds of cities, the kinds of places you want to invest in. Think about the areas that you want to invest in, right? This is no longer a world where your investments have to be in your own backyard, right? Because your own backyard may not necessarily lend itself well to some of these other nuances that we talked about, all right? So again, our goal is just to help everybody be better investors and be smarter investors. And that said, man, the next podcast, Jack, we're going to have some fun with that one. So I know everybody says, never discuss sex or politics or anything like that, but that's exactly what we're going to do.
That's what we're going to do, right?
Yeah, we're going to do it anyway, right? So it's been interesting watching some of and obviously we're not going to make a stand one way or another about which side of the political fence anybody is on. So let me just soothe everybody's soul with that right away. This is not a hate argument, right? This is a discussion to look at what are the things that we need to look at, and what are the trends that we're seeing now that we have a Trump presidency, and how might that affect real estate investors. So it's going to be really, really interesting. We've got some really, really great stats and some interesting articles that have come out that we're going to reference, and we'd love to have you obviously listen to that podcast as well. So we appreciate. Go ahead. You had something to say,
Shecky. What we're trying to teach through this podcast is how to position yourself in front of the trends versus being behind the trend. If you can position yourself and your investment portfolio in front of the trends, then you can afford to make a few mistakes, because the momentum is going to push you forward. So if you look at the trends, demographic, political, that all affects the economic trends. So you're positioning yourself ahead of trends, a big millennial, tidal wave that's like coming. You're in front of that. You can be owning property that that you're going to have rental pool for the next decade and beyond. And then we look at the political trends. That's what we're going to hit on next week, is how's that going to affect you? So that's really what we want to help you guys to understand and educate you on, so that you can win no matter what the climate is or what the climate becomes.
Yeah, well said, brother. That's great. Being ahead of the trends. That's beautiful. So if you got value out of this podcast, please share it. Leave us a review. We really, really appreciate that. And of course, if you want any information about how you can create high returns for yourself, just head over to our website. It's spelled just like it sounds, highreturnrealestate.com. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Jack, for your insights. And we'll see you on the next podcast.
All right, Shecky. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.